Well, today is Wednesday, November 9th, 2011, and I'm Patrick Jones. I teach history and African American studies at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and I am here with Big Mama at her restaurant in North Omaha, and we are doing an oral history as a part of the North Omaha History Harvest, and we're going to be talking about her family's story a little bit, and also about food and the restaurant and being a business owner here in North Omaha today. So can we start by you just telling us your name and spelling it for us so we have that, so we make sure we have that right?
Okay. My name is Patricia, Patricia Givens, Givens, Barone, Barron.
AKA Big Mama.
Yes, AKA Big Mama, right.
My wife and I were talking, we were saying you're kind of like a superhero. You have an alter ego, Big Mama. And then you have your birth name. Okay, and so, so can you start by talking, last time I was in, you were telling me a little bit about your family's story. And so can you just talk a little bit about your family's history and where your family comes from and how they kind of come to get to Omaha ultimately?
Okay. My family started, as far as we can trace back, to it was a plantation in Louisiana, and my great-grandmother was a slave. And then after emancipation, she moved to Arkansas, and they lived in Melvin, Arkansas. I guess there was another, they were sharecroppers. That was another form of slavery. And then, as the story goes, that they were told that Oklahoma was a good place for blacks because Oklahoma was still a territory and it was reserved for the Indians, and so they moved to Oklahoma. It's called Wewoka. That's where my mother was born. And then I was told, other stories I've heard from my family, was that it was too many blacks in the town. And so,
was it an all-black town? I mean, there were a number of all-black towns in that region.
Yeah, I don't know if it was all black, which makes it maybe it wasn't, because it was whites that came and told them they had to leave.
Oh, okay.
But I think it was more blacks than there was whites.
I see.
And so the story that I was told was that in the middle of the night, at gunpoint, they came to the house and told all the blacks to get on this cattle train. They were going to ship them up north because it was too many of them here. And so they shipped them up north to Kansas City. And
what was the name of that town again, just to make sure?
Wewoka.
Wewoka. Okay.
Oklahoma. I don't know how you spell it, but that's what this was pronounced. And at the time, they had a cousin that lived in Omaha, and I had told the family that there was jobs here, and there was the packing industry. There was day work, being a maid in the homes of the rich people here. It was a good place to go. So then my grandmother, my mother's mother, moved here from Kansas City to Omaha. That's how she got here. And started, the family was here.
Okay. And so that's your grandparents, right? And so, so what did they do when they came up here? Do you know?
They did day work. They call it day work. They were maids. They worked at the packing houses, in the dirtiest jobs, the high cellar and the kill floor, which were the dirtiest jobs in the packing house. Janitor work. They were also waiters and porters and all service industry jobs.
Are these, is this your mom's parents, your dad's, or?
my mom's. My dad's side of the family, I don't know much about him. My father was born in Henry, Nebraska, which is on the Nebraska-Colorado border. And the story was told to me was somehow they were one of the few blacks that got the mule and 50 acres. And but somehow that property was lost. I don't know how. And they moved here. They moved to Council Bluffs, and then moved to Omaha. My dad.
Do you know about when are we talking here? Is that the teens? Is that the 20s?
That was like the 1900s.
Oh, so even earlier.
About the 1900s.
Okay.
That's all I know about my dad's people. I know that they originated in a place called Kansas, Peola, Kansas, but I don't know much about the folk there.
So then how do your folks come to get tangled up together and your family?
Okay, when my parents moved here to Omaha, came here to Omaha, they were, I think, like 10 or 11 or 12, and they lived in South Omaha. South Omaha is where blacks lived then, around 10th and Pacific and Pierce. And there was blacks, Italians, Poles, Germans.
Have you ever met Philip Reese? His dad, he's Philip Ordunia Reese. His dad was one of the Tuskegee Airmen.
No.
And his background is African American and Mexican American, but he's from the South Side.
Okay.
You know, his family originally too, and he
I
had
think
a couple of photos from the South Side.
Yeah, I think he lived up on like R Street around 27th and 30th. There was a pocket of blacks that lived there.
Okay.
Also too around R Street, and all that was kind of out in the country or pretty near to the country, as I remember, as I was told.
So that's a different place than where you're talking about?
Right. My parents were raised in South Omaha on 10th and Pacific. My father went to Camellia School, which is now no longer in existence, and my mother went to Camellia's.
What kind of school is that?
It was a public school.
That's a public school. Okay.
I have pictures of him in his graduating class somewhere around here. But that's where North Omaha at that time was where all the rich people lived. It was full of Jews and Germans, other folk with money. So there wasn't any blacks in North Omaha when my parents were in their early teens. And that's where they met. My father...
Meaning on the South Side?
There's a large community of blacks there. That's where they met. My mother got married when she was 16. And I think my dad, he was 18 or 19. He had graduated from high school. And my father loved music. Music was his goal in life. And he graduated from Commercial High, which is now called Tech High. It was called Tech High, but he went when it was Commercial High. They didn't allow blacks in Central. He wanted to go to Central High School, but they didn't allow blacks there. So they told him he had to go to Commercial High, which he was glad he did because they, at that time, Tech High had like music. If you wanted to really be into music, you could do that. If you wanted to be into carpentry, painting, whatever, they had. It was kind of like a trade school. So he was there for the music part of it. And when he graduated, that was when he married my mom. And then they started a family. And my father...
So was he just playing kind of doing it at school, or did he have a band at that point?
Oh, yeah, he's had a band since he was 15 years old. Yeah, his first band was 15. And they made all of their music, all their instruments out of tin cans and whiskey barrels and what have you. My father played the bass, so he made his bass out of a whiskey barrel. And they played around town. They played, you know...
Were they called something? Do you
they
know?
were called the Jungle Rhythm Blues Boys.
Okay, so the photo you have over there is those guys. Great.
And you know, like I say, music was his love. And he got continued in the music field, got a band. And
so are they playing like early jazz at that point, or what are they playing?
Big band music. Jazz, big band music.
What years are we talking about then, do you think?
We're talking about the 30s and 40s and 50s. My dad played clear up until he got sick. And he died
But that
in
band in
1987.
particular, that when he was young, so we're talking the 20s then? 30s?
30s.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, the 30s. Yeah.
Okay. And so, well, let's talk a little bit more, and then since we got onto music, let's just talk a little bit more about that. So that's his first band, and as you said, he plays through the 50s. And so can you talk a little bit more? He ultimately has his own band that's named after him.
Right, and they traveled the circuit here in the Midwest. They would go to Okoboji and Storm Lake, Iowa, Minnesota, North and South Dakota, Wyoming, Nebraska, and some parts of northern Kansas, and then back to Omaha.
So did he have another job, or was he able to kind of make a go of it as a musician?
He made a go of it with a musician, and when the times that there was off season, then he would run, he worked at the bomber plant, he would run a janitor service. There was a time when during the war, the jobs were hard to find because everything was with the war effort. So then he went to work at the bomber plant.
The music jobs were harder to find. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. And what? Well, I'll stay on music for a second. So he was doing that when you were a kid. Like, I mean, that was a part of your childhood, is him playing in band and moving around and going to different places.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, so what was that like, being, your dad's a musician and all that music, or was that something that was also a part of your family? And how you
there
guys...
was always music in the house. There was always musicians that stayed with us. I can remember my mom and him arguing at night about how long is this musician going to stay here, and my father said, well, till he gets a gig. But there were always people coming and going in our house with the musicians. And then I can remember we wouldn't see our dad for like 2 or 3 months. And then, be on the road. And when he'd come, we would love it because we'd get to clean the bus. And there would be nickels and dimes all in the seats and on the floor, so we'd love...
How many brothers and sisters do you have?
I had 3 brothers and 1 sister. It was 5 of us all.
Do any of you guys do music?
My brothers do.
Yeah,
my brothers, and my sister plays a little piano. And...
So did you ever have the chance to go and see your dad play at gigs? Or was that something he went and did and came home and told you about it or something?
Yeah, when I became an adult, when I got older, was when I began to go listen to him play. But as a kid, all we would sometimes he would take us to some of the practice sessions that were held at the ballroom, up the stairs, the
Did you think that was something cool, that your dad was a musician and played, or was that just what your dad did?
Yeah, that's just what he did. Yeah, that was just what he did. But as an adult, we'd go listen to him play. And
so how can you give me a sense? So I mean, they were pretty popular. It sounds like they played the circuit in the region and things. So I mean, how would you measure his? I don't know, his popularity or his name recognition? He had a kind of the band had a kind of a regional notoriety. Is that a fair assessment?
That's what yes. Yes, it was called Basie Gibbons and his orchestra. But yes, he was quite well known in this part of the country.
And then did they play around Omaha regularly too?
Yes, he did.
And where were the kind of places they played here? Dreamland? Did they play there?
The country clubs.
Country clubs, okay.
The Music Box, the hotels.
Was there? Did you have a sense, or was there? So some of those, like the country clubs. That's right. They're playing for largely a white audience there.
Correct.
An exclusively white audience.
Correct.
Was that true of the hotels, maybe too?
Correct. Yes, it was.
And
they'd have to come in through the service entrance. They couldn't come in through the front like everybody else. They had to be on the service entrance.
And then other gigs would be for predominantly a black audience. So if they're playing somewhere like the Dreamland or something, right? That would be more of the local community here going, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Is there anything else about your dad and his music career, or?
Well, he helped a lot of people, encouraged a lot of people, and he was one of the instrumental persons that was responsible for. There was a black musicians union and there was a white musicians union, and he was responsible in bringing the two together into one union.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he did that during the 60s, early 70s, which I thought was great. He really worked hard. And
when did your dad pass away?
he died in 1986.
Okay. And he was actively playing music?
Oh, up until he died of lung cancer, and up until like the last 3 years of his life.
So he did it throughout.
Yeah.
What about your mom? What kind of person was she?
My mom was typical of most moms during that time. They had a bunch of rules and regulations in the kid's mind. Or else you'd get your butt beat. My mom always, took us to church, and that was all part of growing up during that time, because everybody went to church.
And which church
And
did you guys go to?
it was a Baptist church I was raised in St. John Baptist Church. It was on 12th and Pierce.
Okay.
It was still in that neighborhood where most of the blacks live. And what could I say? My mom and the ladies in the neighborhood where I lived were just very strong women. Most of after the Second World War, people from the South just refused to go back to the Jim Crow. And so there was plenty of jobs here with the packing houses. There was over 50 packing houses here, big ones, small ones. And so you would just see an influx of blacks, coming to Omaha for jobs. It kind of reminds me now today of the Latinos that are coming here into the country. It was, coming up, from the South was blacks, but here it reminds me as I see all the Latinos come here looking for jobs, just wanting to work, raise a family. And so you would find, a house for rent. Maybe the landlord would cut the house into two floors, and you'd see 18, 20 people, living in 3 bedrooms until they could get on their, get a job, get on their feet, and then move out. So it was, my childhood was just a very great time. And sometimes, there were only so many jobs they would have for blacks at the packing houses, all the dirty jobs, as I mentioned before, the hide cellar, the kill floor. And so there wouldn't be any jobs, and so the husbands will say, well, I'm going to go to Detroit, because Detroit was where the auto industry was booming, beginning to boom at this time after the Second World War. So they'd say, we're going to go to Detroit, and then we'll send for you. Well, they would get up there and start making, a decent salary, and would never send for the wife and the kids. So you had all these, our neighborhood had, a lot of women with 6 and 8 kids that they had to raise by themselves, making $2 a day cleaning somebody's home in Dundee, and the ladies were very resourceful. I mean, they had trading clothes, trading of clothes and shoes, and my sister would go from house to house on our block, and she would make, bologna sandwiches and potato chips and Kool-Aid. That was the lunch she'd make lunch for the houses, and they'd give her like 25 cents a week. That was big money at that time. But they were very resourceful. And if there was any emergency, there was an older lady, her name was Mrs. Daly, and if it was any emergency, you'd take your kid to her, because there wasn't no quote-unquote babysitters or daycares. I mean, I admire those ladies, because they made just a pittance, but yet they raised 6 and 8 kids, and going to school was a must, getting good grades was a must, and aspiring to do better then what your parents were doing, that was drilled into us very early. So we had something to strive for and to look forward to, you know, as becoming adults. And so they gave us a very good foundation. And school was very important. You had to bring home A's and B's, or else your butt would be beat. They didn't allow you to bring home C's. And so school was very, very important, which...
So the women are in some ways the enforcer too. Right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There were a few men in the neighborhood, you know, that had jobs and stayed on, but I'd say 50% of the neighborhood was single women with 6 and 8 kids, and they just, you know, worked together. We'd have a big block party every year, and they'd have little tables of stuff. They'd have relatives from the South would send them peanuts and pecans and fruits, pears and peaches and plums, and they set them on a table, and you know, you would just take what you needed for your family. Everything was shared. And they had this table over here that had all the desserts on it, and it'd be one big party just around school time, around the time that school would start. And you'd see, you know, older people dancing with younger people. I mean, it was just one big celebration, you know, once a year, which I remember those so well. And we'd have a wiener roast where we'd stick the hot dog on a stick and on a fire and roast the hot dogs. That was really fun. And I mean, it was just a great time. All the games that we played in the streets.
Maybe we need a new Big Mama's Neighborhood Festival or something like that.
I would love to do that. I keep saying I'm going to,
fantastic.
You know, go back to the old neighborhood and start something up like that. But it was a good time. It was
so, I mean,
great
can
time.
you talk a little bit more? I mean, you clearly have you know, a love for growing up here and things, but at the same time, you've talked about some of the inequality and the limits at work for men and things like that. So, can you just talk more about the community growing up and you know, what it was like and what kinds of things you did, where you might go or not, and then also what that meant. You know, so we have a vibrant black community, but it's within a kind of increasingly segregated, broader community too. So, you know, so can you just talk a little bit about that, how those things kind of fit together and what your experience was like?
You would learn very early in the places that you weren't to go. So, for instance, there were little restaurants called Harkett houses, and they were little black and white striped houses, real small, and they had a little. You could go in and order the food, but you couldn't sit down and eat it. You could order. And
those were in all over the different places of the city, or particular?
Yeah, they were like in the downtown area, and there wasn't any out north, but mostly in the downtown area. And what was the most populous business places in Omaha? It wasn't 72nd Street was a dirt road when I was a kid, so. You know, we weren't out that far, but wherever the business area was, it was usually the Harkett House. You couldn't eat there. There was also a place called Reed's Ice Cream, and would have a sign that say, you know, colored not allowed, and they'd have a little window where you could buy your ice cream. My father always told me, don't ever spend your money if you can't go in and be treated like everybody else. Your money's just as good as everybody else. So we used to get ice cream at a place called Hollywood Ice Cream. And that was on 24th and Blondo, and we would go there. But our community, because of the prejudice, I mean, we just had our community within a community. You know, we used to have the big coronation because you'd never see a black person at the Exarban coronation or even be a part of Exarban. And so we would have our king and queen of the year. I can remember my sister was a princess one year in at the coronation. And then we had marching bands and parades, and you know, we had celebrations, and I can't remember all, but there was always something going on, you know, in our community because we weren't allowed in the broader community. And you know, like this area up in here was all white folk, and if they caught a black person up in here, they would, you know, want to fight you. You know, you just knew your limits. There was railroad tracks that were right north of here, And that was kind of like the boundary line. You didn't see any black people beyond the railroad tracks on Bedford Street.
So when you were, how did you know these things? Was it from experience? Was it because people were telling you things? Was it was it
People
just...
would tell you, you would see it, you would figure it out, and you would hear the older folk talk about it. So you just knew,
Do you remember growing up
Yes,
incidents where people crossed those lines and things happened, or what would happen if you crossed those lines?
Yeah, when my brothers were in high school, there was a restaurant called KB's that's across the street from Tech, it was on 30th and Cumming, and they didn't allow black kids in there. So one day a group of them decided to go in there, and they tried to put them out, and they started a big fight. And I can remember my brothers being expelled from school. My parents had to go to school to get them back in because they were all part of that. You just knew. I can remember North High School. There was no blacks in North High School, and I can remember once my brothers were walking because my grandparents lived off here on 3410 Bedford Street. This was all country up here. It wasn't any water. It was electricity, but no water. People had wells. And they were walking, and they walked through the wrong neighborhood, and some white boys jumped them, like by North High School, because that was just kind of, if they caught you, so you hear that, and not to do that. But yet I went to school with whites. Half the folk in my class were whites. You went to school with them, but you had your distances. Even the projects that were down on 20th and Paul were segregated on the east side of the ball field, because there was a ball field that separated. That's where all the white people live. And then on the west side of the ball field, that's where all blacks live. And there were certain days, like for instance, there was a crossroads roller rink. It was on 24th and Leavenworth, and the only days that black people could go there was on a Wednesday. Okay, and then if you went to the theater downtown, like the Orpheum, the Town Theater, the Omaha Theater. If you went to those theaters, you had to sit up in the balcony if you were black. You couldn't sit down in below. And
so I mean, did those things, so in a kind of weird, in a paradoxical way, or what have you, some of the richness of African American culture and experience are all the things that you were talking about before, these festivals, these alternative pageants and things that many look back on today with very positive feelings, and that was a great way to grow up, and there was a sense of cohesion in the community.
Yes.
Yet it's created in large measure because of this segregation too. And then you were talking about these limits. I mean, so it's there, right? But you're living the life you're living. I mean, how much are you aware, or are you upset about it? Is that just the way life is?
No, your parents and your grandparents and your people in the neighborhood always encourage you that you're going to be the generation that's going to make it better. This is the way it is today, but you're going to change it. And we want you to get educated.
Okay.
And that was drilled into us, that you're going to change all this. Okay, we're going to do what we can do, but you're the ones that's going to make it better for the generations to come. So you had that in your mind that was drilled into you. And so you would look at it and think, well, that's the way it is today, but that's going to change.
So there's kind of a hopefulness in it. Do you think that's something? Do you think that's, when you look around the community today, a difference?
Yes.
That despite that inequality in the past, there was, as you're saying, that kind of sense of hopefulness and possibility, and that many people today are not feeling that or seeing that.
Yes, it is, and that really hurts my heart to see that, particularly amongst the young people. How there is. There's no hope. Most of them don't think they're going to live to be 25. Yes, that is gone, and that just saddens me that it's not there. I mean,
because I think a lot of people, young people, black or white or other, when they learn about the era of segregation, and it's not to minimize the segregation part of it, but it's hard for them to understand this that you're talking about, that despite, it's not to minimize or ignore or any of that inequality, but within it, this really positive and vibrant thing, this community and these institutions and this culture grows up. And I think for some young people, it's hard to kind of handle both of those ideas at the same time. Well, how could it be like that? It must have just been like terrible and unrelentlessly terrible, right? Yeah. But people make a way of life.
Well, you
right?
learned that there was two worlds. There was one white world and one black world. And being black, you had to live and work, in that white world. So you learned it, from, how to survive in it. It was a survival sense. And so that's what you did, you survived. With the hope that things would eventually get better or change or whatever. So, yes, but you never thought about it every day. It was your church and your community that made you feel like you were somebody, even though you would meet prejudice in the world, but you knew you were somebody, and you just loved yourself and loved your community and loved everybody. I mean, it was...
Yeah.